Well, good morning, everyone. This is Mike King at Esri. We welcome you from sunny California. To those of you who are facing the brunt of storms still, we wish you the very best. We're appreciative that you joined us for this webinar today, which is preparing web applications for maintaining commonplace names with ArcGIS Online. And we'll introduce our speaker in a moment. I wanted to first introduce a few members of our team who will be on the call and helping us. Britt Bromley, who manages our partner relationships within the emergency call taking space, will take a few moments throughout the presentation today to share some questions that will be posted and some responses, and periodically, as appropriate to the discussion, may enter some questions for our presenter to respond to. I also would like to thank Brenda Martinez and Greg Umali, members of our public safety team here at Esri, who have agreed to help us to manage the webinar today. I'd like to introduce our speaker, and we're really pleased that he's been able to carve some time out of his busy schedule at Esri. We are going to be privileged to hear from Phil Milkey. Phil has been with Esri for a number of years. He's an industry patterns lead with us and a local government specialist. Phil has been a friend to Esri for many years, even before coming to Esri. He spent more than 15 years in public service, starting as a crime analyst, eventually leaving government as the chief technology officer for one of our Southern California agencies. The thing that I'm most excited about with Phil and his participation today is the fact that Phil has also gone through the pain that many of you have gone through in implementing CAD solutions, computer-aided dispatch solutions within a city. So Phil, we'd like to turn the time over to you, again with our gratitude for taking time today out of your busy schedule to share with us some of the things that you've been working on at Esri.
Well, thanks a lot, Mike. Well, as Mike mentioned, I remember the pain involved with maintaining CAD systems. And we went through this process of having an older legacy system that was first something that was the oldest computer that we had in the basement of our police department. And then we upgraded in 2006 to a more current CAD system. One of the big components of that, and that was a big change for us as well too, is that it utilized ArcGIS Server for geocoding data, geocoding initial calls as they were coming in. So you would end up working through this process of having somebody who's on the other line requesting service, and the dispatcher has to find the right location on the map in which to be able to send officers to. Now, typically, that's something that can happen pretty easily when you know the address where you're at. But when people are distressed and they're calling for either some form of police service or emergency management service, fire or medical service, one of the issues that they typically end up facing is not knowing where they are. And so they'll use different types of cues in which to be able to give where it is that their location is. And that is very situational. You know, it can be as simple as them knowing the address, or it can be as difficult as trying to identify which Starbucks they're at. And that can lead to quite a bit in terms of trying to put the location on the map and then ultimately send the officers into the right location. Now, you can see here on the screen, we have a lot of different ways in which people speak commonly about locations. This can include things like mile markers, locations on playgrounds, dorm rooms within universities. If we're talking business names, that can be gathered from a variety of different systems, permitting systems or others, or also knowing where the suite numbers are within some of those apartments as well too. Some of the apartment complexes can be almost as big as small cities, and so identifying the locations of where all of those suite numbers are can really save time and reduce the risk of life that people face as they're waiting on that first response to an emergency activity as well. So this is a question and a concern that I typically face as prepping and maintaining CAD systems common address and common place name system. But in this case as well, we want to see if this is something that has affected you as well. So we'd like to start off the bat here with a poll question.
So the question is, has a bad common place name sent first responders to the wrong location before? So please answer yes or no. So Phil, I think we are probably not too surprised by the results of that first poll question, heavily weighted to the yes.
Yes, understandable. Well, and that's something then that affects everybody, and ultimately that's what we're here for. So just to reiterate here, it's maintaining the proper address data is vital to our computer-aided dispatch process. And we need to be able to keep that data current in order to not only to maintain that address accuracy, but many of these CAD and RMS systems that we work with also maintain premise history that are associated with that location, so that you can find, who has a history of violence, who may be here that is a parolee or a probationer, how many times have we come to this address for noise complaints. Maintaining that kind of address accuracy helps to keep this premise history intact. And it also reduces this time to response and mistakes where we find ourselves, or our first responders find themselves repeatedly communicating with dispatch, taking up the time on the radio waves, and trying to determine where the right location to respond would be. So this is an immediate issue, a risk to life issue, and we've got ways in which we're going to use ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Enterprise in which to be able to facilitate the way in which we're collecting common place names. So just a quick point on composite geocoding. So as we serve as a core mapping technology for a lot of CAD systems, one of the main components and one of the main value propositions that we offer here in this case is to provide flexibility for the geocoding services that we maintain and that we host, and then we enable our users to be able to create these composite geocoding services. And how that works, just for the newly initiated, I imagine a lot of you have actually had this kind of experience before with composite geocoding. But in short, you first try to match a address file, if this is like 123 Main Street, and directly find the location for the incident to a point on the map that's as clear and precise as a location can be. That's usually contained within an address file. And you find these address files as, say, the centroids of parcels, or oftentimes we have agencies that manage that location data so it actually shows up to the front door, a point that says exactly where that location is, and that location is in terms of an address file itself, 123 Main Street. Next from there, if we don't have that address file on system, then the next process that goes through is using a street file or a street center line in which to be able to then match the location of where that incident is occurring along that street center line. And that can occur for things like intersections, which is a very frequent occurrence for first responders, showing up at the intersection, say, of Tennessee and Colton, or other types of intersections that we may find as well. And that's typically maintained through the use of a street centerline file. Now, it's also not quite as frequent, but something that happens where dispatchers are trying to identify locations that may be outside of their jurisdiction. And in order to do that, in order to understand, say, if it's a mutual aid situation, or if it's trying to determine, say, a joint effort towards gang induction or injunction or other activities, you can use county streets, a larger street centerline file, in order to be able to match where the location may be, so that you can then, also be spatially aware that this is outside the jurisdiction, but at least this is where the location of that incident is occurring. Now, from there on out, that's where we end up falling to common places and commonplace names. If we find something like Starbucks or the library or the names of schools, well, then how do we match that and determine that that actually has a location that we can place it on the map without losing that information? Because really, from a dispatch perspective, the worst situation that we could be in is not knowing where the person on the other end of the call is trying to get the responders to show up in order to be able to provide their service, if it's either public safety or emergency medical service. And we frequently find that there is a lot of location data that dispatchers are working with on a regular basis. If it's either the locations of those cars or the fire trucks or ambulances, other complaints that they may have received, premise history or patient history, what are the active warrants, what are citations that are occurring, what are current in progress calls. All of this information needs to be considered from the dispatch perspective in order to be able to provide those first responders the immediate information that they need on the spot. And in order to do that, location is vital to understanding where it is that you're sending your first responders. If they need to understand that this is a dangerous situation based off of previous premise history, or they need to understand some patient history with this particular location and this patient that we're serving here. In order to do that, GIS and the way that dispatch systems utilize GIS provides that context to then be able to have the dispatcher provide that immediately valuable piece of information. This is a high crime area. This is where we have a probationer or a parolee. There's a camera down the street. All of these pieces of information can be gathered using premise history and proximity searches to the location of where that incident is currently occurring, and give a holistic view that a dispatcher can then communicate on an as-needed basis to officers that are responding to the incident. But one of the big questions is, how does all of this authoritative information reach the dispatcher? The locations of where is this Taco Bell, where is this library, where is this dorm room? How is it that you currently maintain an existing dispatch commonplace name system? And I can tell you what I frequently dealt with. Something like this. I received Post-it notes and scratched on pieces of maps. I've received more emails in the field. I've received a wide variety of different ways in which people have tried to then improve the way in which we're sending our first responders into the field. And that's ultimately leading to our next poll question that I'd like for you to answer here.
Poll question number 2 is, how do you currently update your commonplace addresses? A, keep record of address only, so a new commonplace means memorizing the street address. B, when notice an error, record it in the call of service synopsis. C, notice an error, email the dispatch supervisor. D, proactively update and develop a common places database. Or E, other. So Phil, looks like we have a winner, if you want to call it that, in proactively updating and developing a commonplace database, which sounds what we'd like to probably hear.
That's right. Well, and what we're going to show you now is actually a method in which to do so using ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS Enterprise if you have this deployed on premises. providing a single destination where we can find the applications that we need to do the job is ultimately what we're talking about here at this point. And ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Enterprise provide this destination that you can go to. You know, one of the things that, you know, we're pretty commonplace now is that you can, anytime that you're lost, as long as you're willing to admit it, you can pick up your phone and find the direction it is that you need to go. But the sad truth is that there's a lot of information that is locked up in disparate systems within different kinds of first responder agencies. And it is very difficult to find the piece of information that you need or the application that you need in order to be able to serve the purpose, serve the mission at the time. So what we're proposing and what I'm going to show you here is actually how you can utilize ArcGIS Online to build an application for recording common place names and then work through a QA/QC process in which to be able to do this and to produce the best data. So the first thing that we're going to do, well, this is our end goal here, is to add or is to be able to use an application in the field to record all of this common place location. And this can be information that is specific to what you need based off of the CAD system. Now we've dealt with a lot of different CAD systems in the way in which they record or utilize information or pass information through to a central geocoding service, what schema may be necessary. And I suspect that a lot of people online here have you know, started to understand what it takes to manage that kind of system and the addressing system within there. So at this point, one of the bigger pieces here is actually maintaining, collecting a method for collecting this information, and then maintaining a method for QCing that data as it's coming in from the large number of people that you enable with that collection application. It may not always be that you're getting the best data, and it's ultimately your role to comb that information to ensure that it meets criteria that'll work for what it needs to do. And this is an application that can ultimately make that process much quicker. So really in this case, what we need to think about is the nice, clean place that we're going to be working in. We need the right tool to do the right job, and we need to invite the right people in to be able to handle this. So one of the first questions that we're going to really ask is who is going to be doing this collection? We're going to establish the group, we're going to establish settings for that group, and then we can invite users to that group. But first, just ask yourself, if this is something that is the responsibility of patrol, is this going to be a project that you start first with interns, or is this an application that you can extend to public works or other city departments that may also have some insight into developing new businesses or new areas that may really require a level of service that your agency provides? That's all something that can be handled here by using this configuration of ArcGIS Online, sharing and establishing the right way in which people will be working with this application. So I'm just going to go right through it and show you how to do this. And in this case, we're going to start from the beginning here. This is our front page, that destination, the portal in which we're collecting all of the information that we need to. And in here, what I want to be able to do is understand the locations of these groups. Groups are essentially designed to enable the privileges for who is it that can access data that we're going to be working with, and then also organizing the maps and apps within those groups. So, for example, as we were just seeing on that slide previously, internal affairs is going to have its own group that only a few specific people can be granted access to. In this case, the collection of common place names, it's not really a level of high security that we're concerned about, but we're going to go through this process of creating a group in order to essentially be able to manage how is it that we're collecting this information. So the first thing that I'm doing now in looking at this group is uploading a thumbnail. You know, it actually matters more than what you'd think as far as this initial setting a nice, clean place. Because the more people that end up working with this and understanding what different applications are there to enable the work that they're doing ultimately sets up an understanding and a user experience that you want to be able to provide for them. So what I'm doing here now is just adding some group details here. I'm adding some tags to make it easy to find, and I'm adding a good descriptive group name and summary so that somebody can understand what it is that they're being invited to and what they're doing here at this point. So you can also establish some settings here. Who can view the group? Only group members, people in the organization, or if this is going to be available for everyone, say make a public-facing web app that can be used and extended to, say, other departments, other first responder groups, maybe if this is a mutual aid situation, that is something that's certainly available in which to be able to share these apps and share this information. So who can join? Well, it's those requested membership and approved by the group manager so that you can walk through a process of saying, yes, you can join, no, you can't. Anybody who's invited by a group manager or anyone. And then who can contribute content to the group, and that means uploading data or creating new applications. This means that if this is something that only group members can do or only group owners and managers. So the setting I'm going to choose for this is only group owners and managers, ultimately being me in this case, because I'm setting up a workflow that many people are going to be attaching to and understanding. So I'm beginning to create this group. And what you'll see initially is just this initial set of views here in which we have our summary and understanding of it. I can do a lot more in-depth description editing here where I can include images or other information. And we can see that we don't have any items that have been saved to this group yet. You'll see also here on the right-hand side, membership requests. We haven't had anybody request to join this, but I can go through and understand who in my organization needs to be able to have access to this. So just for the sake of this, what I'm working with is ultimately a couple of interns that I want to be able to provide access to in order to be able to have them work through this process and collect this information. I'm only going to give this to specific people who need to be able to work with it. Content, members, and settings, these are all those same scenarios that we were working through before, and we can always go through and update and make changes as need be. But now what we'll see in our groups tab is that we now have a new location in which to be able to park the work that we're doing. And we're going to be able to see here that this is the group, this is the collective workspace for us to collect this common place location information. So that's really our first step here, is to provide and create a clean place in which to begin doing the work. First step. So now what we're going to do is publish data with ArcGIS Pro. This is a professional desktop GIS, and in this case, we're using it for data management. Now, I can understand a lot of cases here with some of our CAD partners. A lot of the help that they provide has been in ArcMap so far. So a lot of the training and the way in which you would go through and actually work through the process of editing existing addresses or common place names, or even editing that street file, is something that is typically done in ArcMap. I'm going to show you in Pro how it's easy to work with. It's easy to be able to publish this information. It's actually a little bit easier. And so I'm going to bring this, manipulate fields either in Pro or online, and then you can identify the layers to be published and set some of that symbology, and ultimately publish these layers individually. So here is Pro. I like to think it's pretty approachable for some of our newer users, people that haven't had the chance to really be able to work with desktop GIS before. I think will find it easier to understand some of the ribbon style that we have here that are actually contextual menus. If I am highlighting a new area, I can see that I have the chance to be able to change appearance or labeling or understanding some of the background data that I have here and some analysis features that are immediately existing and available to me. I've got two pieces of information that I've collected here and added into this Pro package. In this case, what I have is the locations of these commonplace addresses, and also a dispatch zone. This is in this particular case, this is used to be able to provide some context about different dispatch area. If this is reporting districts, council wards, a lot of you are in this very similar situation. We're going to publish both of these pieces of information here after we're happy with the symbology and the way that we've got them, so that we can provide not only the information that we're looking to be able to edit, this address information, but also the context that's associated with it, so that we can understand, is this inside, outside the jurisdiction, which dispatch zone is this within, and also basically understand any other additional context that we need. This can be a lot of other area. This can be other data, if this is, say, potentially zoning data or other background base maps that we have that we want to be able to share into this application. But from our perspective, we know that the base maps are going to be hosted by ArcGIS Online, so we don't need to worry about those. And now we're just going to ensure that we're happy with the symbology that we've got here. So in this case, this is set up for single symbols. What I have is locations, and I can choose if I want to symbolize via different categories, unique values, say if we have a different kind of place type, or proportional data, or we can even symbolize this data by a heat map and draw a density. Now that's not going to be what we need here at this case, but let's add additional fields as need be, or make some fields visible or invisible. In this case, we want to really make sure that our commonplace name or a common name field is visible here at this point. And so that's good. We don't necessarily need our join ID, and we've got location, text, unit type. I think all of the rest of this is going to be good for us to be able to share. If I wanted to add a new field, it's as simple as adding a new field here, specifying the data type, if this is long for text or if this is numeric, and then I would go through and click save in order to set that new schema here and then be able to publish it. At this point, I'm ultimately happy with the schema. I don't need to worry about any of the saves or the changes that I've made here. And what I want to work through now is this process of actually sharing this as a layer packet or as a web layer to my organization. So just a heads up, on the top right, you'll see I am logged into the ArcGIS platform for law enforcement. This is giving the law enforcement perspective here, although we've got a variety of public safety dispatch specialists on the line here. So this is the portal, ArcGIS Online, in which I'll be hosting and sharing this content to. And I can choose what my name is going to be for this hosted web layer, and I can also change what this layer type is going to be. One of the things I really like about Pro is to be able to highlight and mouse over and receive contextual information about some of the information that I'm working with. So this I right here gives me the chance to see what does this layer type mean if I'm new to it. And this ultimately means that I can publish this as a feature, a tile, or a vector tile. What does that mean? Well, feature is ultimately data that is vector data that you are publishing. In this case, these are a lot of points with attribute information that's associated with it. Tile is actually, if this is a very complex set of data, or if this is an image, this will actually create tiled images that'll be stored in ArcGIS Online or Enterprise and store it in a way that re-renders it and draws based off of the specific zoom extents and values that I'm at. So if I'm zoomed in really close, it'll give me the detail that I need. But if I'm zoomed out, well, I have a rendered image that's already stored that can provide me that information. Vector tile, it's a new thing. It's essentially the same type of thing as the tile setup. It's just that it does it through vectors, and so that you can move quickly and pan throughout the course of viewing and reviewing that data. So I'm also, it's a good intent to make a good summary of this information, and to also best practices here is to also record tags, and so that it's easier to find, and I'm able to search and identify some of the information that I'm looking for. So now for my sharing options, again, I can make this, the default is to share it to my content. And my content's that folder within ArcGIS Online. That's just the work that I'm working on right now. But if I want to make this available to others within the organization, Well, I can share that here. In this case, this is the group that we just made, the Common Places Address Management Group. And now we're going to analyze, understand if we've got any initial layers. Now, this says I don't have a feature template set, but it's only a warning. And that would basically mean that what's this going to look like as you're editing the information? That's a feature template set. This is really simple information that we're collecting, so we don't really need a feature template to collect this information. So now that we've analyzed it, I'm going to publish it. Oh, I've already published this. Got a new name there, and now it's publishing this information onto ArcGIS Online to then utilize and to work through, and for us to be able to bring that information collectively together into a web map. So we're going to see that information in just a little bit, but what I want to share with you is a little bit of detail about this information. So somebody used to say to me, and it was the most interesting thing I think I could have taken, a PDF is where government goes to die. And what that means is that it's frozen in time. It's immediately something that is outdated as soon as you render it, as soon as you print it. We're all aware of the problems that we have with either printed paper maps or trying to work with copies and pieces of databases that are all over the place. In this case, distributed GIS is about establishing live data for the configuration into web maps and apps. This is the perfect opportunity to understand, now that we've published this Common Places address layer, this is now live. It's living. It's something that is editable and contained and distributed to people whose responsibility and authority it is to maintain that information, which is a totally different picture than what it used to be. And you can ingest this information, if it's RMS or CAD data, into ArcGIS Online and view it via desktop or web applications or devices. And there's a lot of different authoritative agency information that can be coming, if it's traffic information or your existing CAD calls, RMS, other intel that we're collecting, or some of our own information that you can find either through the Living Atlas, weather information, what's our up-to-date picture of traffic that's updated every 5 minutes. All of this is information that's available through ArcGIS Online and ultimately is secure within your organization. You can host it within your firewall if it's data that absolutely must be kept within the firewall, or it can be hosted online, really reducing the cost to your infrastructure and the concern about updating that infrastructure on a regular basis. So now that we have this data that's live and it exists, we're going to employ a key methodology to be agile here at this point. We're going to pick up that data and we're going to make a web map out of it, and then we're going to create a web app out of it. So I know you're all excited as I am. Let's see what we've gotten here. All right, so that information that we just posted, we just created this on the 17th, is now available here. And we can open this up in a map viewer, or we can also click on this and view a little bit of detail here associated with it. And so with that, what we're going to be doing is configuring the hosted layer first, just reviewing what we've got there. And in that, we're going to edit privileges, we're going to enable attachments, and we're going to make sure that it's downloadable. And then we're going to go and we're going to create a web map and configure some of the properties in order to make this ultimately perform well for this web application that we're creating. All right. So one of the other pieces here, so I have this addresses layer, but I also want to add previously posted information to this as well too. That's that law dispatch zone. But before I do that, I'm going to go through and just check out my address information. So you can see we've got a lot of information here, a lot of configurations that we can work with. We've been making a lot of advances in ArcGIS Online over the last 6 months. And so I really think it's worth kind of checking out and understanding how all of these end up working. But we're going to change a couple of things from defaults here as well. So the first thing that we want to be able to do is enable attachments. And what that does really quickly is just makes it possible for you to collect images in that web application so that you're able to then, if I've got trying to differentiate the difference between a new Starbucks or an old Starbucks, I can take a picture of it and I can attach that from my mobile device, and then we can review that information through the QA/QC process. And I also want to make sure that I'm able to export that data. And so what that means is that I can export this to a shapefile, I can export the data to Excel or to a file geodatabase, and ultimately make this something that can be taken out of the system if need be, so that it can then be loaded into whatever method that your existing CAD uses in order to consume commonplace information. A couple of tabs here that we can see. We can review some of the immediate data. We can change and review some visualization, what this ultimately looks like. But the really interesting thing that we want to be able to do here at this point is actually set some of our usage changes here. We want to be able to see who we've got, who's using it. Of course, nobody, because we haven't really shared it yet. And we want to be able to delete, protect this so that the interns that we're inviting to view this are not able to delete this. And we're also going to enable editors. This is a really interesting feature here as well, too, especially coming from some old school GIS where this is a lot more difficult to do. I am first enabling editing, and now I want to keep track of who created the last updated features. And I also want to keep track of created and updated features. And then we also have different places and ways in which we can set really who can edit the features, what kind of editing is allowed. You can add and update and delete. You can just add features. You can update attributes only. There's a lot of different ways that you can configure it so that you're able to set the right privileges for the people who will be working throughout this application. And the other thing about this as well, too, well, if I've got some interns that are out in the field that, well, they're not doing so hot, I can know which ones are and which ones aren't, because I'm keeping track of who's creating and updating the features or who's last edited the features. So if I've got something consistent that's happening, then I can go through and check and address that personally. And then we're just making sure what other kinds of features we can do here. And ultimately, this is the way in which we're enabling how this application performs behind the scenes. So I'm just saving those features there at this point. And now we understand basically an overview of this, excuse me, an overview of the information that we've got here. Commonplace address management. This is an editable feature that's exportable. Now, I mentioned before, I'm just going to go to my content and make sure that I'm able to share that other data that I had previously shared before here. This was our law dispatch feature layer. So just if you're curious on how to do that, this is the My Content section. This is that folder that's kind of my working folder. Well, I've already previously published that law dispatch layer, and now I'm going to share that into my working organization here. And so in this case, this is the Common Places Address Management, and I'm going to share this into the group. All right, so let's see what we got. We have Common Places Address Management. And in here, what we've got are two features that we're going to bring together into a web map. Now I can begin here creating the web map, or I can also open this map in a map viewer. It'll bring those features up to bear. And it's asking me, this is smart mapping, so that this will ultimately ask me, well, what's some initial characteristics that I'd like to be able to symbolize these attributes here. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit cancel because I'm happy with the defaults that I'd set. And I'm just going to search for a layer. In this case, it's the law dispatch. All right, and I'm adding that data here. All right, so these are the first steps to creating a web map. Now, I want this law dispatch to actually occur or to show under my addresses layer. So I'm just going to drag that up above. Now if you're familiar with GIS, that's something that's not too new to you. Just be able to work through the table of contents and change where the locations of these are showing and how they all are ultimately rendered. Now, I want to change a quick thing here about the labeling for my dispatch zones. And I want to create labels. And the field that I want to use for that is that zone, it's L zone ID. And I want that to be blue so that I can immediately understand that these are within these blue colored polygons that we've got here. This is the visible range. This will show if it'll make your labels disappear or appear based off of how close you're zoomed in. And then ultimately, I'm pretty happy with what I've got here. I've got these address points. I can see some of the information that I've got there. These are all the pieces of information that I'd prefer to see here. And if not, I actually see something that I want to change. So what I'm going to do is just go through my pop-ups. I'm going to configure this pop-up really quickly and just understand what I've got available to me. These are different things that I can use in which to configure, well, what shows, what doesn't show. And, well, it turns out that display ID just really isn't all that, or that object ID isn't really valuable to my end users, the people that are working on this, and it's not something that they have the ability to edit anyway. So it's not so good. And I also wanted to make sure that join ID doesn't show. Now, you'll see some new features, some new information that's contained here that's not displayed. That's the creation date, the creator, the edit date, and the editor. That's all that background information that you're going to use in which to keep your intern straight for this job. And you can see when you click on one of these is just a little information down here. Who edited it, how long ago? All right. One more quick thing, and then we're off to the races. So I've got my layer name is address_RGD. What does that mean? Let's change this to something that we can actually understand here throughout the course of our web application that we'll be creating. So we're going to change this to common places. All right, and our law dispatch also really isn't common language here at this point. So let's change this to dispatch zones, so that when people are seeing this in a table of contents in the application, that it's something that makes more sense to them. As a rule of thumb, you really want to keep from using, like a lot of special characters or acronyms or things that, that your end users won't quite immediately understand. Because remember, our end goal at this point is to actually create something that people will be able to understand immediately and understand what this is trying to accomplish and how you're going to use this. So as we're saving this map, I'm going to name this Common Places. I'm going to keep some of that same tag set that I was using before here, and a description of our map. So this is our Common Places web map. First saves it in my folder here, but we do want to make sure that this is actually shared to the group that we're working with, that Common Places Address Management group. All right, we just made a web map. So now what we're going to do is just review where we're at. And make sure that we've got all of our pieces in place here. So just one second. Okay, we got base map, reference layers, all of our web map details. And now what we're going to do is to configure that first application, the crowdsource reporter. And this is something that's actually going to be very easy. You can accept a majority of the defaults getting started and have an application that you can use right off the bat. And we're going to start just taking a look at what this process ultimately looks like here. So this is something that first you publish from your group dialog. And so I'm going to my groups section. And in here, what I'm going to find is my Common Places Address Management group. And you'll see that we actually have that Common Places web map that we had just created. So the crowdsource reporter application is something that initially utilizes a shared dialog from the group itself. You can create web maps from web maps, but this is one that actually requires you to do it from a group. And the reason being is that you could actually refer to multiple web maps. Say if you wanted to collect information about manhole covers and common places, well, that's something that you can do. So we're going to create the web app, crowdsourced reporter. We're just going to call this common places. Got our tags. And our summary, this is our places reporter application. And it initially saves in the folder. So now it's going through, it's creating this web application, and then it'll walk us through a configuration dialog that will make a couple of settings here at this point. All right, so it starts here from using the group name that we initially published, Common Places Address Management. And we can change that application title, Common Places Reporter. And record your common places. So there's a lot of configurations that we can actually work through and start to understand here. The help window, you can type your own help context here so that somebody who's beginning with this for the first time will be greeted with a splash page where they can understand what this application is about and what they need to do with it, so that as they're on their mobile device, they're able to immediately configure and make this work. And then we can also change some things about the theme, coloring, header texts, header backgrounds. These are persistent throughout the use of this, if this is viewed on a mobile device or a desktop application. And we can also show some other options here as far as these pop-ups or reference layers. So, we can ask the question, what is the reference layer? Or what we're ultimately wanting to show here. And so we would show the reference layer as that dispatch zone. Reference being context, something that helps us to understand where we're placing this point and why. It basically acts as visible behind the scenes thing. And we can also see and view what other item details that we can make visible. Now, just for the sake of complication, we're just going to reduce that. We're not going to add any other additional fields that we want to show. And we can also set what that zoom level is for the selected report. If we see on a map, how far in do we want to zoom? And that's something that you want to play with. We're just going to accept the default here at this point. We can also show the legend and show the base map gallery so that you can also set basically if they wanted to view images in order to make a solid reference to, or if they wanted to use community base maps, or they can change it to say like a low light base map group as well too. So access, one of the interesting things about this is it gives us the potential to allow anonymous access so that you could share this application across the board if you'd like to just about anybody. Now, the problem that I have with that, at least in this particular workflow, is that this is mission critical data that I want to put in the right hands in which to be able to collect this. I want to know who is collecting this data, and that identity ultimately provides a sense of authority that they are the right person to record this information. So I feel a lot better about who's actually doing the work here at this point. And it'll store the ID of those authenticated users as well too into the edited data. We can provide additional search options or provide even geocoding services here if we'd like to as well, just to confirm that the geocoding services that we have are using are checking. So if I'm at a new location and I wanted to double check that this shows up as a certain way in the address, well, that's something I can do with the default geocoder here. Now, we're keeping it simple and we're just going to focus on some of the basics here. And so at this point, what I want to be able to do is just provide you that initial feeling of I can do this, and I can do this by accepting some of these initial defaults. So I'm going to save, and that's going to save these configurations that we'd set up here. And now I'm going to launch this app. So here we go. So I'm signed in. I'm already signed into ArcGIS Online, as you can see over here on the top right. And what this is going to now enable me the chance to be able to do is, you can see this is what it shows, what it looks like here at a desktop, right? But what does this look like, and how does this respond in terms of it, say, being able to be used as an application? Well, you can see it's a responsive design application that will work just as well on a phone as it does here within this mobile device. Now I'm going to submit a report, and I can collect the information here about my house number, and say 234 North, and street type, we'll say Folk. street type Ave, suffix drive, we don't have that. We can even collect unit type or unit number, say if this is apartment complex B, and a location text as need be as well too. So as I mentioned before, this can be used to collect standard address names, or it can also be used to collect common names as well too. So given that this is unit B on Folk Drive, let's just erase some of these unit information here and just go straight up with a common name. And so in this case, what we're talking about here is AK Smiley Library. All right, real simple thing. And this is the other interesting thing, is that you can connect attachments to this. So an image, say, of what we're looking at here. And so what I can also do, it says, collect or click to add a point. But I can also, on my device, use my GPS to actually get down to the point of where it is that I'm actually looking for this point to be added. And I'm going to report it. All right, thank you. Your report has been submitted. So that's a pretty reasonable workflow for somebody to be able to do, in which to be able to collect these common place names. Keeping it simple, keeping it something that really anybody can do here at this point, but ultimately providing something that's going to be very useful for you on the other end. A lot of authoritative data that you can now use in which to be able to set what it is that I need to be able to collect. So that was the crowdsource manager, or the crowdsource reporter. Now we're going to configure the crowdsource manager. Again, agile configuration. We're going to go through and create a crowdsource manager app. We're going to select the group containing the common names for that web map. We can set a title, custom messages, themes, the coloration, and some report settings here, so that ultimately we're going to create an application that's used to QC or control the quality of that incoming data. As again, we never really know with our interns. I'm just kidding, interns are great. So we're going to go back and go to our group section here and find our common place address management. Now, one of the things you'll notice here is that that application didn't by default share to this group. So that's something that I want to check here, and I actually want to share that crowdsource reporter to the group. So we'll just go through this again really quickly. Web mapping application, share to that common places address management. All right, there we go. Going back to groups, and we are going to open our common place address management folder or group, and in that we're going to share one more application, create a web app, and in there you'll notice crowdsource manager. It provides the ability to review crowdsource information and update attributes such as status, assignment, etc. Here we go. I'm going to keep the same tags that we had before. We're just going to make it real simple for a summary, manager, and done. Creating a web app couldn't be easier. So now this is coming up, providing us some configuration details that's very similar to what we were working with in the process of configuring the crowdsource reporter. And again, this application is specifically designed to go through to enable somebody to highlight individual points and to understand and to edit some of that information here. Is this something that's correct? Who edited this? How long ago? How can I see this within the database so that I can understand and make this data the cleanest that it can be? So I can change, it ultimately defaults to the name of the group. I think that actually works here, but I can change other things, greeting message, or I can enable a help window that's of my own design as needed as well too. I can change themes, options as well that look very similar to our crowdsource reporter, but ultimately, I got to tell you, some of these defaults here are basically what you're going to need coming out of the gate. So it's very quick to be able to create a method for being able to manage the quality of that data that you're crowdsourcing from that reporter application. All right, so we've got another application. Very quick, very easy. And what I just want to do is go back to my content section, because I know that created it within my content itself. This is, again, my own working space, but I want to share that with my Common Places address management group. All right, here we go, and let's see what we've got. So now just going into my groups, and I can see that Common Places Address Management Group that we've been working in this whole time, Crowdsource Manager, and then Common Places Reporter here. So these are two applications that you can now understand the details for, share through your organization through a variety of means, and make this something that you can maintain the highest quality data in order to help you understand those common locations that you're going to be working with throughout your city. So this is a pretty agile, easy workflow in which to create applications to be able to manage that common place location. And I've provided a little bit of information here in this blog that basically walks through these same steps as well too. Creating a group, publishing existing common place names, author a web map, configure the crowdsource reporter, and configure crowdsource manager, and ultimately now exporting that data for updating the CAD system as need be. So just to reiterate on that, well, how do we do that? You can always go back to this hosted layer, this hosted feature that you can understand, view, you can change the symbology of any time throughout the course of this, say if people don't like purple or whatever. And then you can also then in here, in your common places layer, you can export that data to a file geodatabase, to KML, to any format that's necessary, or because it's a live service, you can actually hook this service up to a composite geocoding service, so that this is something that as soon as that data is QC'd and correct, it's available for the method that you're using for geocoding. Well, I think that's pretty great, and it's a pretty big improvement from that post-it note, that's for sure. So just to reiterate on what it is that we've done here, one more time, is that we've set up our group, we've published address data, we've configured that web map, we've configured the crowdsource reporter, and configured that crowdsource manager. And there's a blog here that can help you do this yourself if you just need to refer to any of this. So I've got one more poll question for you here. Thanks for waiting. And Britt, if you don't mind closing us out with this question.
Yeah, not a problem. So will you make it a priority for your agency to collect and maintain common place names with distributed GIS? So please select yes or no. So not too surprised, Phil. Overwhelmingly was answered yes, and I'm sure a number of people on this call are already doing that, but that's great to hear. So during the webcast, there was numerous other questions submitted by people, some really good ones, and thank you for all your questions. We are short on time, so we will follow up on those questions. So Phil, I think we have a lot of work to do to respond to some of these really good questions, asking about some template apps, some configuration questions, how to share data with maybe interns using collectors. So there's some really good questions from the attendees on the webcast today. So with that said, again, we will follow up on any questions that were unanswered during this webcast, but I will hand this off now to Mike King for some final comments.
Thank you, Brett. Thank you, Phil. We really appreciate your time and your expertise today. And to each of you, thanks for joining us. We are continuing to work feverishly in the areas that are listed on the screen, and just wanted you to know that we will continue to try to develop, create a better understanding, and then create templates and tools to make these things easier for you. Everything from address database management to real-time analytics. One of the areas that we have recognized is very crucial for 2018 is to get the messaging out about how to migrate your two-dimensional data into 3D. And also with that include capability for indoor routing and better indoor actual physical location. This is all in cooperation and under following the example that's been given by the FCC, and location accuracy and indoor routing is part of the ruling that has come down. To you will start receiving. So we look forward to that. And then we'll continue to look at other kinds of technologies like drone or sensor data and the Internet of Things, or all of that massive IP-based intelligence that's available there. A final reminder that we do have licensing that is very specific to public safety and very complementary to your missions. The thing that I think is the most exciting is in many locations we're seeing that it is actually advantageous to look at enterprise licensing over what you have traditionally been paying because of some of the ways that this has been configured. So you might talk to your Esri rep about that, or send us a note that you'd like to talk to them. Finally, the important thing about that is the ability in major events to scale to infinity number of users, something that hasn't been offered before or during training, to be able to use an infinite number of people in your ArcGIS environment. We look forward to seeing you again in 2 months for our next CAD webinar. We will be meeting with the FirstNet App Store and talking with them about what they are doing, and we'll be sharing with you the applications from Esri that will be going on to the application store as well. We look forward to seeing you at NENA 911 Goes to Washington, at APCO events, and other events, including Esri's Federal GIS Conference and our International User Conference. And if you haven't been to an Esri User Conference, please make time to come in July to San Diego and join 18,000 of our closest friends as we come together to talk about GIS, and specifically GIS in public safety and national security. All the best to you, and thank you again for attending.